With so many likable characters, intriguing combat, and phenomenal visuals, Honkai Star Rail is really a good game in its own right. But of many different aspects of the game that anyone can enjoy, I cannot express how much I'm excited about this story. Now, it's easy for us to play through the game by simply following the story presented in front of our eyes, but if we dig a little deeper, we can start to really appreciate the amazing connections, in-depth symbolisms, and even a dark secret that might be looming in the future of the game. And it all starts with our first destination, the frozen world of Jarilo VI. Throughout our journey in Jarilo VI and the city of Belobog, we're constantly reminded of the hardships, the struggles, and the survival of humanity. Now, we could simply take this as a common storyline in any game or anime, but what makes Honkai Star Rail so unique in its presentation is that this plotline directly correlates with the path of preservation and its associated Aeon, Qlipoth. One legend describes that Qlipoth foresaw a disaster that could obliterate the galaxy, so they built a barrier to protect the living world. Now, while we can't really verify how accurate this is because it is a legend within the story, what's interesting is that with the Stellaron first arriving to Jarilo VI, people thought of it as a symbol of calamity, which prompted the construction of the wall that we see today under the leadership of the architect named Alyssa Rand. Of course, she would later become the first Supreme Guardian of Belobog. The reason why this is so interesting is because the history behind Qlipoth is being mirrored within the entire story of Jarilo VI. The preservation of mankind against a threat. Maybe the Antimatter Legion. Maybe the Stellaron and the Fragmentum. Which makes a lot of sense because the game tells us that the Architects are a faction that is directly associated with the path of preservation. This is very interesting because this could set the foundation of how the story will be told in the future worlds that we travel to through the parallelism of the history behind Aeons. And of course, even the story of the second world relating to Shenzhou Alliance, we can see something very similar. The story of Shenjurofu is directly linked to the Aeon of Lan and Yaoshi, the Path of Hunt and Abundance respectively. And if this pattern continues in the storytelling of Honkai Star Rail in the future parts of the game, we could really appreciate how intricate the story will be. If we understand the meaning behind paths and eons, we could potentially guess how the story will turn out, and that gets me extremely excited because I want to see how everything is connected in the game. Now, before we completely derail, let's go back to Jarilo VI. So after the arrival of the Stellaron and the start of the Eternal Freeze, the survival of mankind has always been symbolized with the path of preservation for hundreds of years. But whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, the 18th Supreme Guardian, Cocolia, she begins to cause some issues when we think about the idea behind preservation. After being manipulated by the voice of the Stellaron, she eventually wants to rebuild the entire world by destroying the very thing that she was sworn to protect, eventually leading to the rift between the overworld and the underworld. So on the surface, the overworld can be seen as a prosperous city, staying warm even through the hardships of the Eternal Freeze. There's even things like flower shops, museums, kids receive pretty decent education, and the people of the overworld are even given the leisure to play music and perform in bands like in the case of Serval. But in contrast to this beautiful outer appearance, the underworld is riddled with hardships and struggles. The lawless community where people are left to make ends meet, and the only order is created by the Wildfire organization, which Sela is directly affiliated with. Not to mention the healthcare system in the underworld is very scarce, and it's pretty bad. It's not until Bronya Ran, the heir of the Supreme Guardianship, stands up to her adopted mother Cocolia that the sense of preservation continues to exist within the world of Jarilo VI. But what's really interesting is that Bronya Ran has nothing to do with the path of preservation. We obviously know that she is related to the path of harmony. So why is this? One way or another, if we think about Bronya's whole story, her ultimate objective was to reunite the people of the underworld and the overworld, which just happens to be symbolized in the path of harmony that she follows. And it gets really obvious when we read the description behind the Aeon of Harmony in the game. Intelligent life forms must discard their cowardly selfishness and the difference between individuals, fusing into one singular melody to have the strong help the weak and to protect life with death, which reflects Bronya's entire journey in Belobog. Now, of course, she didn't do it alone. I understand that with the help of the wildfire, the Trailblazers and Sela, they were able to accomplish the preservation of mankind in Belobog that originated from the architects. Now, to be completely honest, I have a weird suspicion that Sela's Path of the Hunt also might have played a big role in the story of Jarilo VI, but I'm not too sure just yet. Maybe after playing through the story of Shanjorofu and understanding the context behind the Aeon of Hunt, we might get a better idea. But continuing on, since we are on the topic of the path and characters, there are a couple more things that I found very interesting and also extremely suspicious. So consider this as a food for thought, or maybe just a simple theory or speculation. Of all the characters that are currently in the game, we have two characters that are on the path of preservation, March 7th and Japard. Just out of curiosity, I did a bit of research behind their ideologies and characteristics, and after not long, I noticed something very peculiar. So both March and Japard have a strong sense of preserving the moment. We constantly see March taking photos to preserve her memories. And for Japard, it's very clear that his sense of duty and responsibility to preserve the livelihood of the citizens of Belobog is his top priority, sometimes even going against the will of the Supreme Guardian. Now, this might be pretty obvious, but there's one more thing that stands out with both characters, and that's the concept of the unknown. So to put it simply, both characters are on the path of preservation. But for March, she seems to have some kind of dark past that she can't remember or comprehend. And to add to that, remember the raiding pistol that is in Hertha's space station? It completely just doesn't work on March, which might suggest that her identity is very complicated and important. Now, when it comes to Japard, we can notice within his character story that he's constantly confused and questions the decisions of the Supreme Guardian, which is kept secret from him. Now, this might sound like a stretch, but if you remember the story of Jarilo VI, even the architects, a faction that is directly associated with the path of preservation, seems to have some similarities. The architects obviously signifies the preservation of the people of Belobog, but a secret was kept from the people for hundreds of years. The truth behind the Eternal Freeze and the Stellaron that fell on Jarilo VI, which we uncover throughout the story. Again, it reflects both the characters March and Japard. They preserve something, but their existence or their thoughts are always attached to some kind of a secret. Now, to take things even further, there's a bit of ambiguity and suspiciousness even surrounding Qlipoth, the Aeon of Preservation. The Interastral Peace Corporation, or IPC, which also happens to be the faction of Path of Preservation, seems to be keeping a huge secret behind the origin and the truth of Qlipoth. So much so that even Hertha essentially gave up on trying to understand the existence of Qlipoth. Is there some deep secret hidden away behind the Path of Preservation? It is quite suspicious that after the conclusion of our journey in Jarilo VI, we get a random telemarketing message which eventually leads to the IPC wanting to know the exact details on what occurred in Belobog. Is it a coincidence? Or does it have something to do with the fact that both IPC and the architects are factions that are closely associated with Qlipoth? Obviously, at the current moment, it's impossible to know since the game is still so new. But if there's one thing that I can say for sure, I can't wait to continue my journey through the story of Honkai Star Rail to hopefully learn more about these detailed connections and uncover the secrets that are looming in the future of the game. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to press like and consider subscribing for more lore content in the future. And let me know in the comments if you have any additional thoughts or speculations as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.